We're live. Excellent. We are here today to talk about synchronous quizzing, which is a new feature we've rolled out to our instance of Brightspace, which we're sort of excited about. It's sort of a small change, but it opens the door to different utilizations of the quiz tool in Brightspace. So Shannon Brenner, myself, and perhaps our producer, Travis Hunt, will jump in and kind of just have an open discussion and kind of go through within the Brightspace LMS how you can turn this on and maybe discuss instances where this would be useful and maybe instances where it wouldn't be useful whether you're teaching face-to-face, hybrid, or online at NICC. Awesome. And you can kind of help me walk through it too, Shannon. So Shannon's here in the more tools, quizzes. We've accessed and kind of set up a practice or a fake quiz here. So this functionality, can you point it out for us, Shannon? How did we get here to turn that on?
So in the editing window for a quiz, it's under timing and display. And then, so you're going to use actually two different screens. You're going to use that and availability, dates, and conditions are both going to kind of work together here. So you have a time limit set, you have timer settings, and this is where you toggle between asynchronous or synchronous. By default, it will be on async. So if you want to turn on this new feature, you'll click here and you'll see the start date and the end date are already in here. That's because they are based on your start date for the quiz. So you can change this to when you want the students to start taking the quiz. And then the end date and end time will be based on your time limit. So there are kind of two different things to remember here. One is the amount of time students will have to take the quiz, which in this case is 40 minutes, but the actual end date for the quiz might be later than that. So that means the timer will be up and students will no longer be able to take the quiz at the end of that 40 minutes, but they will still see the quiz in Brightspace until its end date and time has passed.
And so if Shannon had one we were just playing with before that we went live here. But if you come into Brightspace, like this won't be on by default. You'd have to kind of seek this out. So if you're used to setting up sort of untimed quizzes, the Brightspace default, that won't change at all. And we're looking at that new quiz view that Brightspace kind of rolled out, I think just a couple of semesters ago. So yeah, there's a couple things to keep in mind there. Some of the functionality, what this opens up, you can sort of see that difference between that 40-minute, students get 40 minutes, but they have an hour and 20 according to this, that it's open. So what that opens up, and if you want to kind of scroll down, Shannon, is kind of a setting that not a lot of our instructors are using because it's a little bit confusing, but it's really pretty cool. It used to be called submission views. Now it's quiz results displays. And this probably isn't the time to get too deep into it, but that extra window of time, if you are doing a synchronous quiz, suddenly you have the ability to have an open window after everyone's submissions are in and have to be in, where students can do things like look at the correct answers to some of the questions or look at the class average grade distribution. If you want students to be able to kind of see that kind of stuff beyond just the feedback you provide on the quiz tool, you can kind of automatically provide access to things. You always could, but the synchronous tool kind of guarantees that everyone has equal access during a time frame to have a secondary view at that quiz. So again, just seeing the potential correct answers, what their own answers were, especially if integrity is a concern with the quiz, depending on how it's being used. You have a lot more control now because when everyone has to be done with a quiz.
So if students are sitting in your classroom and you want them to be able to finish a quiz and then see the correct answers once they've submitted it, they can have that time while they're sitting in the room. And you will set the end date for your quiz to be, let's say, at the end of the class period. And that means when students leave the classroom, they will no longer have access to the correct answers. And so they can't write them down and maybe give them to somebody who hasn't yet taken the quiz.
Right. So it's all overlapping all of a sudden, where the quiz tool by default, it didn't necessarily, even if it was in a face-to-face class, students might be taking it at different times or start late, walk in late to class or whatever. So the differences are small, but they kind of open up and can kind of layer into other things you can do with the quiz tool, which is kind of neat. Shannon, before we jumped on, you were talking about like pop quizzes. So if we're thinking about the face-to-face teaching environment, pop quiz would kind of be a neat way. What were your thoughts there?
Yeah, and not just face-to-face, but also in a synchronous online course, you could use the synchronous quizzes for a pop quiz. So let's say you have 30 minutes of class time where students are doing something or watching a lecture or whatever, and then you want a quiz to pop up and be available for students and have it start at a specific time. As soon as they're done watching the video or doing this activity, they have to answer some questions about it. And so only the students who are there, whether it's on Zoom or in person, are able to access that. They have to be online at that time and in there. And so they are the ones that get participation points, for example, for that particular activity.
Incentive to be on time too. I think you'd have more control over sort of just-in-time quizzing. I'm thinking of like courses like the health sciences or EMT that I've worked in previously, where there's a very specific purpose for a very specific lesson, but class is very long. It's you're moving from one thing to another. And so these synchronous quizzes might be an interesting opportunity to quickly assess where students are at, on a very scheduled basis. And for classes where that time management piece, whether face-to-face or online synchronous, is really important and you have to stay on task, I think the synchronous quizzing tool, if you're moving together as a group, would sort of allow for quicker, quick assessment in a way that would make sense to students. We're doing this in a more conventional way, like we do on paper and pencil, like we used to do back in the day. We're all sitting here. This is different, but would allow more for that sort of common everyone taking an assessment all at once, but on Brightspace.
So one thing I wanted to point out, I just went into View as a student, and that we use this calendar widget on the course home pages. And this, you'll see, does not show when this quiz will start. So students will not see that on their course homepage. They're only going to see when the availability for the entire quiz ends. So they will need to actually go into the course to see when that quiz starts.
Yeah, the start date is there. And if producer Hunt wants to jump in at all regarding that was something we kind of just discovered, was that even in the manage dates tool, if you check the box that says calendar, like show in calendar, it was just that end date that was popping up, interestingly.
So when the students go to more tools, or when they go to see the quiz in the course content, then they will see when the timer starts. So it's just in that calendar widget where it's a little bit finicky at the moment.
And in most instances, I probably think in every instance where you'd be wanting to use synchronous quizzing, you're directly communicating with learners. You're live anyway, so maybe that matters a little bit less. You're introducing it and saying, okay, it starts at 2:00, or we're doing it in 5 minutes, or that kind of thing. And the instructor has to be sort of actively managing the quiz, where in most instances, it's not quite like that. In a lot of instances, we're giving students a long window to quiz, and this is definitely different.
So I set this quiz to start at 2:07, and now that we're past that, you can see coming in as a learner, it has the current time, it has when it started, and then the student can start the quiz at this point. If it was before the start time, it would just say up here, it would just have it listed when it starts.
And I just wanted to chime in real quick. I did notice that if the student tries to go into the quiz before that time has started, it does have the start quiz button grayed out, and it has a little countdown timer right above the button that lets you know that the quiz will start in 2 minutes or whatever. And once it hits that point, the student does not need to refresh. That blue button will just automatically appear. So that's kind of a nice little feature as well.
That's good to know. I saw that your quiz had 2 attempts. Shannon, I was trying to think of sort of brainstorm like instances where that might be useful, where you have the start date, or excuse me, you have the timer start and then the timer end. I'm trying to think of where that might be.
2 attempts in a synchronous quiz.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be interesting for if you're trying to get students to be able to memorize something quickly. How many of a certain thing can you name, or how many parts of something can you label in 5 minutes? And maybe the students can try it again a second time in that, pop quiz period or whatever in class,
right,
to see if they can do better, kind of challenge them to beat their initial score. You could do it for something like that.
Yeah, almost like a gamification piece. I'm thinking like a Mario level or something like that with that timer. I think one thing we could do is talk to accessibility services about this. I don't think our team has reached out about that, but how does this impact, students with accommodations? How do we work around that or accommodate when a student has a letter of accommodations that sort of requires extended testing? How does that work?
I think the accommodation in Brightspace will work in that if you set the time
good call.
It's 10 o'clock and they have 40 minutes, then a student with double time is going to get 80 minutes automatically. And so it will automatically extend the end time for that student.
That's definitely something I'll have to check into. I didn't even think.
Yeah, we'll confirm that, but I'm fairly certain that will be.
Yeah, but even if if that's the case, you'll have to think about that time management piece potentially. And that's something I've worked with a number of instructors on, is they always wanted you to do a lot during class time, including assessment. But that gets difficult if someone has extended time and you're trying to move on to the next thing. You can't do that. So you have to rethink the way you use time. So oh, go ahead, Jen.
I've seen instructors, if a student has accommodations for extra time and the quiz needs to take place at a certain time in the course, have students leave for 15 or 20 or 30 minutes and go take it at the testing center and then come back when they're finished.
Right.
So that's another option.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think usage, and I would encourage anyone sort of listening to, try it out. Think about an instance where it makes absolute sense to try it, and then maybe begin to experiment sort of beyond that. I think I'll try that. Do you have any thoughts, Shannon, about asynchronous online, where and when it could be useful? So much of what we do is the online calendar week of Tuesday through Monday. I think about our Z courses, where we've really tried to give students a lot of choice about when they learn. But I was in another meeting this morning where we were talking about students' proclivity for procrastination, and the students kind of get started about 10 o'clock on the 7th day, 10 p.m. How this might actually potentially help. You'd have to do it in a way that doesn't limit them, though.
Right. In an asynchronous course, it would be hard to require students to be online at a specific time and be prepared and ready to take an exam. But you could use it for something like a bonus point quiz. Anybody who's online Saturday evening at 8 p.m. will have an opportunity to earn 10 bonus points or something like that. Or you could do optional
groups.
You could make optional group work. Yeah. Group quizzing, something like that. You could use it for, I think it would have to be optional or bonus, or there would be more than one way for students to complete that thing.
You could
so maybe offer multiple days and times or something like that, but
through the groups tool. Yeah. And students could self-select which group they wanted to go into. Am I the Saturday testing group or whatever? And as far as integrity, almost I'm trying to think, you might have to use different quizzes, which again would be an option, right? But like if we wanted integrity in online asynchronous courses, synchronous courses, whether they're using Honor Lock or not, but synchronous quizzes in groups where people are taking different versions of the test, like aligned with the same competencies or ELOs, slightly different, variations on questions, would be a really great way to ensure integrity and not be concerned that students are sitting in the same room together necessarily, or, have their phones up and are texting each other during the live
I'm not sure you would even need to use groups. You might be able to use the special access features in the quiz itself. But then in that case, you might need multiple instances of the quiz. So you might need to copy the quiz and then give a certain set of students access to one and another set to another. And that would probably require manual grading.
That's kind of a cool idea. Because again, I think we were talking about the context was maybe CBE when we were talking earlier today about helping students stay on track. And if there was a thing, if the student had a choice about when they took that assessment, but then it became a core part of their schedule and became a thing that becomes much more harder, more difficult to procrastinate on. We'd be doing those students a service if we give them the tools to structure their learning in that way, where they're committing, locking it in, scheduling around it, right?
Yeah. And the gamification idea is interesting too, because you could have a set time when students can pop in and almost treat it like a Kahoot, where maybe you even put the quiz up on a screen and they can access it for a certain time period and answer questions together, or put them in groups for that, or complete the quiz as a class or something like that. So I could see some opportunities there too.
That optional or bonus opportunity is interesting because, it's in the online asynchronous environment. We still have we still have scheduled office hours that students can either kind of make or can't make. So we'll never figure out the scheduling piece for online asynchronous students, in any respect, 100%. But some options and trying things out would be, I'm sort of excited to try it out the more we sit here and talk about it, just brainstorming kind of cool things we could do. I'm trying not to think about take this quiz 7 times in an hour, like faster and faster. What's the fastest? Right. How fast can you complete this quiz? 100%.
No, but I do like the idea of extra attempts in that time period, because I do think there are some programs and some courses where being able to recite something really quickly is really important, like medical terms or dosage calculations or something like that, where you might need to really be able to think on your feet. That being able to kind of let students quiz themselves.
And what if it's for practice and not tied to the grade book, right?
Yeah. And it's self-competition rather than competing students against each other.
And we didn't even think of this. We didn't even discuss this before we went live just now. It just came to us. That's cool. Well, we would invite others. We're at about the 15-minute mark. So we would invite others to brainstorm or join the conversation, reach out to the DIT team. We'll probably include this month's newsletter that went out has details, and I'm sure in future newsletters we'll continue to kind of explore these ideas, and we're going to invite others to participate or send us your ideas to online@nicc.edu if you've got ideas, but let us know what you're doing or how you use it for the remainder of the semester. Bye, everyone.